Welcome to Rhythms of Faith. Thanks for being with us here today. We're thrilled to be joined by the Reverend Dr. Hugh Page Jr., the Vice President for Institutional Transformation and advisor to the President here at the University of Notre Dame. Hugh, thanks for being with us.
Good to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I've been at Notre Dame since 1992. On the way over, I was counting on my fingers how many years that is. So
you don't have to say. They could do the math if they want.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm Vice President for Institutional Transformation and advisor to the President. I've held this role since 2022. It was a new position that Father John created, growing out of the strategic framework for diversity, equity, and inclusion to help synergize our efforts around campus in this area. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a great first 3 years in the role. We have quite a few people doing great work in diversity, equity, and inclusion around campus. We have a practitioners group that consists of, at this point, I think, in excess of 230 individuals representing some 47 to 50 academic and non-academic units around campus. And my job is to help coordinate the activities that are going on in those units and to be of service to them as they think about initiatives that can benefit the university's journey to being the best version of itself.
What's the best thing about that job so far?
I think the people.
Yeah.
And we have individuals who've never been involved in the work before, some who are veterans to the work, others who are fellow travelers who are interested in the work, and seeing the efforts that they are engaged in around campus is really exciting. And most of the work experts in the field suggest consists of building relationships and fostering networks of individuals who can lead the way and be on the front lines in making the university more welcoming and inclusive. Mm-hmm. And so I think the most exciting part of the work for me is getting to know those individuals and being a part of their efforts.
Yeah, beautiful. Cool. Yeah, Hugh, you wear so many hats, and which is one of the reasons we're just thrilled to have you here today. But the Reverend Dr. Hugh Page, Reverend, you're an Episcopal priest.
Yep.
Doctor, you're obviously a university administrator, but you're a Hebrew Bible scholar,
mm-hmm.
and as well as a blues musician.
Mm-hmm.
How do you describe your vocation, given all these different hats?
Yeah, I think they're in conversation with one another at all times. And in some ways, I guess, in another generation, someone who does what I do might think of a particular thing as a vocation, and then the other things that they do as avocations. Mm. And in my mind, they're all part of a whole, part of a seamless garment, as it were. So the work that I do as a scholar in Hebrew Bible, I really am interested in the ways that ancient texts communicate, and particularly early Hebrew poetry and Ugaritic myth and Sumero-Akkadian myth, and the ways in which they express human longing, the desire to understand the mysteries of the universe and the like. And the work that I do as a priest takes part of that tradition, the Jewish and Christian traditions in particular, and attempts to think about how those things can apply to day-to-day life within an Episcopal congregation and within the larger Christian family at large. Mm-hmm. But again, how do you understand those mysteries, and especially the mystery of love and human connectedness? And surprisingly enough, I think that that's central to the work that I do as an academic administrator. Mm. Universities, colleges, community colleges, they're all incredibly complex organisms, and people make them run. Mm-hmm. And, the joy of doing that kind of work is that you have an opportunity to think about how love manifests itself in the day-to-day decisions that you make about admissions, about financial aid, about recruitment and retention of faculty, about the hiring of staff. And so that's the through line, as it were, for me, connecting with people, thinking about the mysteries of the universe, and especially thinking about the mystery of love and how that makes itself known in all of those settings.
Yeah, so, in the pursuit of one's own vocation, is it as simple as being drawn by love, following the path of love?
Yeah, it depends on the day of the week, how I think about that and how I try to enact it. So on the one hand, I think the most straightforward answer is yes, it is that simple. But the decisions that you have to make, whether it's what you're going to choose to do your research on or how you're going to enact a love ethic in the midst of those other demands that administrative roles make of you, that's kind of complicated.
Yeah.
But, I think my test is whether at the end of each working day, I can go home and look at myself in the mirror and be able to recognize the person that I see and to be able to say that I've done my very best to make love, a kind of other-centered notion of commitment to other people, the focus of my work on that day. And, there'll be times when, I'll have to honestly admit, wow, you fell short. But I hope that those days are few and far between so that, at the end of each working day, I'm able to say, you did your best. And, you made love the measure of everything that you think, do, and dream.
So you recognize yourself best when you've loved the best? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. And, there, as I said just a moment ago, it's really it's difficult in the world that we live in to sometimes hold yourself fully accountable for that being the centerpiece of your life, especially when you're in a demanding job, you're, say, in a competitive academic field, you're trying to make sure that you get all the research, teaching, and required service work done that you need to get done, and as an administrator that you attend all of your meetings and that you're being a responsible voice for the benefit of the entire university rather than your individual unit, or when you're, in my case, doing Sunday supply work and you may be driving hither and yon and expected to preach and, be a good celebrant and a focal point for, the local gathering of a worship community, to do all of that and, to be fully present with everyone, to be fully capable of giving yourself to those that are in need. And I think for me, when I'm able to do that most fully and most effectively, I think I feel most grounded. So it's a
what's
pretty
under the hood
demanding
there?
thing.
Like what helps power this desire? Because it's incredible. I mean, and I think all of us, when we hear what you're saying, can resonate with this idea that we just hope and pray that every day we're able to live up to this standard. But then what, how do you do it?
I think just trying to be in touch with the well springs of my own spiritual life. And, I would say that those well springs have been fueled by kind of my being raised in a religious family, but also a family that valued African American common sense and mother wit, while at the same time being fueled to a great extent by a kind of contemplative life that focuses on the natural rhythms of existence, and trying to the best of my ability to be in touch with what those are at any given point in time. I'm not overly ebullient, I would say, as a person. I try and stay pretty much grounded in the middle when it comes to emotional extremes. I don't always succeed at that, but that's where I try and situate myself.
It's allowed to come out in the music.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons that I appreciate music so much, because when words fail in terms of providing an outlet for prayer, music does that for me. And all genres of music, whether it's classical or country or folk, certainly the soul blues continuum has been a very important touchstone in my own development and my own way of staying situated in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your work as a blues musician. You're in the Oblates of Blues. How did that happen? And of course, I want you to talk about the origin of my favorite Oblates of Blues song, which is "If you can't preach the gospel if you ain't had the blues."
Yeah. So music has always been a part of my life. My mother passed away about a year ago, and I had forgotten how much music was a part of their life and a part of our life as a family. So she was a pianist and an organist and member of our Baptist church's choir when I was growing up. My father played the trumpet. His father played the mandolin. His brother played the organ. His sister played the violin. And then on my mother's side of the family, my grandfather was actually a trumpeter and played blues for a short time when he migrated from Virginia to Baltimore. That's when he met my grandmother, and she wasn't as enthusiastic about the late night blues scene as he was. And
I can't imagine why.
Yeah, so she said, something to the effect, as he conveyed it to me, it's either the blues or me, and, he chose well. So he continued to play the horn at his church. So I guess, I was fated in some way to be a part of the musical scene. And so I was brought up playing the piano and the organ until I was in the 7th grade. And at that point, I started, I really wanted to play the guitar. Everybody had dreams of being Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
Of course, I was nowhere near that talented. So I played in a neighborhood band. We used to rehearse in my next door neighbor's basement. We were a 3-piece band. We had a guitar, a bass player, and a drummer. And so that was how I started formally in playing music, kind of in a non sort of classical way.
What'd you guys play in the band? What kind of stuff?
Yeah, mostly rock and soul.
Yeah.
We had a very limited repertoire. But we played those songs with incredible enthusiasm.
It was quality over quantity.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then I stopped when I got to high school and went to college, and didn't really do much music until Max Johnson in, I think it was early 2000, started the Oblates of Blues here on campus.
Huh.
And the first gig that the band played was at the Senior Bar, which used to be where Legends of Notre Dame is currently. And I sang one song during that initial gig, and then simply stuck with the band. Taught myself how to play the harmonica, and that's been the story. You can't preach the gospel if you ain't had the blues. When I started singing with the Oblates, I thought, there are a few blues songs that are kind of in my heart and soul that I'd like to write. And the first one that actually came to mind was "You Can't Preach the Gospel If You Ain't Had the Blues," and it grew out of my own ruminations on life as a newly ordained person back in 1980. I was really young, just gotten out of seminary. I was assistant to the rector in a very large African-American Episcopal congregation in Maryland with lots of people who knew me since I was a kid, even though I was late coming to the Episcopal Church. Baltimore's African-American community is kind of intricately networked. And so, there were lots of people who had watched me grow up and, some others who were just getting to know me. They knew I was well educated and so forth. And, several older folk in the congregation kind of wanted me to understand and appreciate that ministry is serious work. And if you have virtually no life experience, and I certainly fell into that category, as a 24-year-old newly ordained person, they wanted me to understand that life's got really hard edges, and that, if you're going to be an effective preacher, an effective minister, you've got to be in touch with those rough edges of life. And so that's what the song grew out of.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm getting this sort of deep picture of integration that you keep coming back to, where it's all of the different spokes on the wheel are coming back to this centerpiece, and that manifests also in your scholarship. You compare or parallel the Hebrew Bible with some experiences of the Black experience through literary or musical traditions. Like, can you talk a little bit about some of your work there and where that fits in the pie?
Yeah, sure. So, I can point to two pieces of work that have been really influential in this regard. So, in 2013, I published a book titled Israel's Poetry of Resistance, Africana Reflections on Early Hebrew Verse. And that started out not as that book. It started out as a continuation of my doctoral mentor's research on early Hebrew poetry, which he and one of his good friends published jointly as a dissertation at Johns Hopkins in 1948 and 1950. And what they wanted to do was look at the earliest poems in the Hebrew Bible and do what amounted to an historical and theological survey. And so when I took up that topic, starting in about 1996, and ultimately leading to the writing of this book, I wanted to just continue what they had done. But I started asking questions about the context within which that dissertation emerged. So I realized that, okay, there at Johns Hopkins University, I grew up maybe 1.5 miles from the Homewood campus where they did their work. And it just seemed striking that our worlds as individuals in some ways intersected and in other ways did not. And what I thought it would be interesting to do was to ask, what would happen if I took that topic and began to reflect on the resources, the literary traditions, the ways of viewing the world that were common in the part of Baltimore in which I grew up, and brought them into conversation with those traditions and with the school of scholarship within which those biblical traditions were engaged. And so that was how that book was born. And, it required thinking about early Hebrew poetry in ways that I had not been trained to think about it, but also recognizing that it was a kind of scholarship of détente, of bringing worlds that were in some ways very separate into dialogue with one another. The scholarly world of Hopkins, the scholarly world that I was occupying as a person of color, working within that tradition, and also the early Hebrew poems, which were born in communities that were either in dispersion or in the process of being born in the midst of crisis. And that, in many respects, certainly described the communities in which I lived and moved and had my being in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of work.
Can I ask, as an example, just you treat, for example, I think it's Psalm 68 as a mashup. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of genre choice there?
Yeah, I knew nothing about mashup until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when the DIY culture of the students that I was teaching was brought to my attention. And so this notion that you can bring disparate genres into conversation with one another really resonated deeply with me when I read Psalm 68, which, some scholars have argued is a collection of first lines of ancient poems. And, certainly when you look at it, there's not a lot of traditional symmetry and rhythm in that larger composition. And so when I began to think about the mashup concept and how that might shed light on that particular poem, I thought, well, maybe we don't have to think about this as a collection of first lines. Maybe it's a collection of disparate ideas about the nature of God, about the nature of Israel's experience in the larger world. And maybe we can understand it that way, as a consciously asymmetrical composition intended to remind those who read it or recite it or sing it of the asymmetrical nature of the human experience overall.
How that's something that I find really interesting and sort of arresting about the Psalms is some of them are really difficult to understand at a cognitive, like, sort of logical level. How does that relate to how we use them in worship, do you think?
Yeah, I think the fact that the Psalms lend themselves to liturgical usage in a variety of worship settings is, in a sense, a way of ensuring that the wildness, as it were, of the Psalter overall isn't lost.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think that there are occasions in which we may, in the use of the Psalter, inadvertently be seeking to tame it. And in ways that are not necessarily productive. So, I remember reading a paper at a conference many, many years ago and posing the question of why certain passages, including some in the Psalms, weren't actually edited out.
Yeah.
Because they present liturgical problems. They present problems to readers. And his response was, well, if you do that, then in some ways you limit the Psalter and the Bible's capacity to speak to difficult situations in modern life. So for a fundamentally fraught contemporary world, you need texts that are able to speak to that fraughtness. So, I've continued to think about that over the years. And, when I look at certain features of the Psalms, I mean, in liturgical settings, there is a part of Psalm 137 that you're just not going to sing for obvious reasons. But if we were not to have it, there's a dimension of the human experience of anger and frustration and rage that, simply would be absent from a sacred text. And, I think in some ways that would be to our detriment.
Yeah, the question becomes too, you said I try to live in the center, right?
Mm-hmm.
And none of us always feel like we're in the center.
No.
So where are the moments where it's possible to kind of allow those things to be animated?
Yeah.
And, in some ways, what better place than in a community, in a liturgical celebration? I'm not arguing in favor of reading the line from 137, but I do think that there's merit to the emotional expressiveness of the Psalms being allowed to, really be all encompassing. That
Absolutely.
is, it's not often experienced that way, I don't think. And
Right. Or, a book like Lamentations.
yeah.
You need goodness. You need texts that give those of us that are experiencing the highs and the lows and the ambiguities of life a way of liturgically expressing the frustrations and the difficulties that grow out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, and sort of that experience of being in the pit doesn't separate you from the love of God.
Absolutely.
That's part of our tradition.
Absolutely.
So I always think of that too.
Yeah, nor does the sort of ecstasy and joy of jubilation, right? Like,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that experience, I think, can it's so full and enrapturing that maybe we could think it's all about us.
Right.
And experienced in community, though, you can't help but see how it's connected to our relationship with God.
Absolutely.
And even tempered by the experience of people who are suffering.
Yeah,
around you.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally.
Which I think connects to the blues in a very deep way.
Mm-hmm.
But can you talk a little bit about the blues in general, or specifically about what makes the blues the blues?
Yeah, boy, that you get 1,000 answers.
Yeah.
If you ask 1,000 different blues artists, blues performers, blues poets. For me, it's honest engagement with life in all of its messiness, all of its, as my mother-in-law used to say, all of its everydayness, and a willingness and capacity to query it in an honest way, to ask questions about those aspects of life that are often considered taboo within ecclesial settings, to ask about, the tough parts of relationships, to ask about, what it means to be without opportunities for economic and social advancement, and to do so in ways that allow you to have agency, even if it's only in asking the question, and being able to celebrate that messiness in the context of performance and the call and response that's a part of performing the music when you're in a public setting. And that whether that's in a high-end blues bar in Chicago or on a front porch with your friends, just being able to put those emotions and those experiences into a rhythmic context and use it as a way to elicit healing and wholeness is really life-giving and life-changing.
So there's something about the performative act itself that facilitates this transformation, you think?
That's been my experience,
Yeah.
and I don't think that I'm alone in that. I think that there, you could ask any number of performers, and many of them might articulate it the same way. Certainly for me, whether it's composing, performing, being in an interactive relationship with the people that we are in the presence of when our band performs, all of those things I think are fundamentally transformational, or at least they have been for me.
Are those same types of things happening when you're doing your work as an administrator? And how?
Yeah, I would say that's another through line. So, yeah, I would say they are. And I try to make myself conscious of those times when that sort of transformation is ongoing. I think within academic administration, things can and often do move at a much more deliberate pace. Mm-hmm. And the decisions that you might make about policy-related issues in an academic institution may well take, a year or more to unfold. And so you don't actually see, in all instances, the fruit of a decision as quickly as you might see a response to a particular song or set of lyrics. Sure. Or interaction with a crowd in a blues performance.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I'm actually struck by that. I've been struck by that as you've been talking, as a gift, if you will, and maybe not a gift we all desire, but this kind of long-term blossoming. Mm-hmm. You had this early musical training, and then you set that aside, and you started working on your book project in 1996, and it came out in 2013. Mm-hmm. It's in a different way than you had envisioned it, and you had this experience in the 80s, and then it became a blues song in the early 2000s, It's one of the things that we try to work on in the class environment is kind of how do you strengthen yourself? How do you steward your gifts for this kind of long haul or long run experience of life? Yeah. Is there advice you'd give about the intersection between that instant feedback and then this sort of long-term fruit bearing?
Yeah, I would say allow yourself to have time to blossom. And that is a really difficult thing in an environment like our own, where we reward ingenuity and quick turnaround in terms of progress. And meaningful, deep learning often takes years. And you have to find, I think, as an individual, that balance between doing things that enable you to have a career and pay the bills, while at the same time doing things that are soul nurturing. And the soul nurturing stuff takes far longer than the stuff that puts you in a position to advance in a career. Over a 4-year horizon, you can get a bachelor's degree, you can enter the workforce, you can set yourself on a trajectory for success in a profession. In terms of being fully aware of the world around you and deeply appreciative of those things that make us who we are, who we're called to be. Sometimes there are 10-year, 15-year cycles of growth that you may not even be fully aware of, that you have to just let unfold. I wasn't, in my mind, ready to be a Bible scholar as a teenager or a blues musician as a teenager. It just had to happen over the course of time. And so I can look back with gratitude and appreciation at the amount of time that it took for all those things to unfold.
Yeah. How can music energize us in the fight for justice?
Yeah. I think about the artists and the music that shaped my own commitment to justice and social transformation in the 1970s. Artists like, bands like Earth, Wind and Fire, or artists like Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Roberta Flack, and a host of others. And, I think that music in some ways can speak to people in ways that even the most well-crafted homily or speech just cannot. I think there's There's something about the rhythms, the intonation, something about poetry in and of itself, especially poetry that's set to music that can do remarkable things. You know, the song that really shaped my own understanding about the power of love when I was a college student was Earth, Wind, and Fire's All About Love, First Impressions. And, you know, of course, Stevie Wonder's Living for the City and a number of his other compositions. I look back now and I realize how impactful they are. You know, I still dream about those songs and still play them and derive incredible inspiration from them.
Yeah, I'm just so struck by that, too, because I asked you a question about justice, and you talk about some artists in the 70s, and a lot of people might automatically dissociate the idea of these artists striving for justice from this incredibly joyful and life-giving musical output that they created. But you're arguing that these things are intrinsic to one another.
I think they are. And, you know, that's not to say that music today doesn't do the same thing. It's just that at my age, when you begin to look back at formative experiences in life, those were touchstones for me at a pivotal point in my own development as a 16, 17, 18-year-old student in an environment like Notre Dame, you know, where you're taking classes that are making you think about things you never thought you'd think about before, and when the world is going through incredibly traumatic changes. You know, I was a college student from 1973 to 1977, you know, and 1973, that's 5 years after the assassination of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Incredible changes going on in the country. And so, you know, it's every bit as complex and fraught as, you know, 2024 is.
Right.
So, you know, my encouragement would be for our students to look at the musical matrix in which they're embedded, and also to look at those matrices in which their teachers were embedded, and to think about those musical touchstones that can inform and nourish us in the quest for justice and peace.
Beautiful. Is there something you can play or sing? I don't want to put you on the spot, so you can say no, but
so
I was hoping to have my keyboard here, but I wasn't
no problem. So I'll sing you the first line of a song that I wrote not long after You Can't Preach the Gospel If You Ain't Had the Blues. It's called I Gotta Get a New Gig. Gotta give me a new gig, baby, 'cause this one I've got is blowing my mind. Gotta give me a new gig, baby, 'cause this one I've got is blowing my mind. Tired of working 24/7 just to make ends meet. Tired of laying my soul on the line. That's just the opening line.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Well, I have to end with our traditional question, which is, if you were an animal, what animal would it be?
So
we do our breaking of the ice at the end.
So when I was a college student, during my first year, I had a circle of friends, and we each gave one another animal names that stuck with us over the next 4 years. And my name was Bear.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
So it has continued to be a sobriquet.
It has remained.
Scent. It has remained. It has remained in force.
Okay.
That's great. That's great. Thanks so much for coming, Hugh. We're deeply honored to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on the Rhythms of Faith podcast.